ostensibly, in those days, it was really DIY because a lot of knowledge wasn't freely available like it is now. So you'd learn things like having breeze blocks to put your speakers on probably was a good thing to do. Probably not the best thing to do was actually the fact that your studio table was above your futon bed with said breeze box. So you obviously make sure you don't live in an earthquake zone so nothing bad happens. It involved like secondhand speakers. I had some Tannoy MS-20 Mercuries, which I once saw in the backdrop of a Simone Butler video, I think at Radio X here in London, that they got them there. And then you also wanted to make everything really individual, so I found some really cool Ford Cortina blue spray because it came in like this weird, really weird wood veneer. So I then painted the speakers with blue and then put gold dust on them and then put lacquer on top of them, so they just looked like nothing else. So I was really proud of those speakers. I think I got them for like £80 in a second-hand shop from a guy that used to work with me in a classical music shop, actually. And then, of course, there'd be things like the Atari 1040 ST with a TV screen in there. The TV screen got me in trouble once with the TV licensing authorities because everyone grassed you up when you bought a TV in those days, and you had to write the address down and stuff, and they came round, but then they saw the fact that I actually had Cubase or Logic. Actually, it was Elab running at the time. They didn't do anything because they could see that I was working very hard and not watching BBC. And then I had on Sonic samplers and Tascam keyboard mixer with MIDI mutables. And what else? Not very much else at all, just very rudimentary equipment, and the sampler had hardly any memory at all. I think I started off with 0.5 megabyte and then managed to pay for an update to 2 megabyte. And then I would use Nyquist theorem and heavy truncation to get the most out of everything. So with a bass drum, I wouldn't sample at full frequency, for example. I'd sample maybe half frequency because you don't need that because of Nyquist. And then I'd truncate the hell out of it, and then I would maybe just have a bass drum and just have the transient of a bass drum and then put that through. And then I would sample like the 303 in those days that I borrowed because I didn't have one. And then I would actually sample it with full resonance and then use the filters within the sampler controlled by the mod wheel to bring it all down. So really, really basic stuff. Everything is an influence when you're that age coming through music, and you take everything on subliminally, and having a big influence almost means that you're sort of emulating. And I think all I was doing was ingesting a large amount of music and then regurgitating it in a way that didn't make sense, but kind of did make sense. So I'd be spending an awful lot of time going to record fairs at Brighton Centre, going to record shops, and of course I was actually working in a record shop that time. And I was really trying to learn how to, because again, there was no tutorials online that you can go, well, how do you get a bass drum to sit well in a mix? Or how do you do this and how do you do that? There was all this stuff of like, well, the 909's the drum machine that you need to have, and you need to have this, which I never had a 909. And I just learned from listening to records more than emulating. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm going to gather in a lot of people. I think a lot of us were struggling to get it all to work, to make sense of it. And because of that struggle, because it being difficult, it gave each track its own individual character. Whereas now, again, going back to the tutorials and stuff, and with all this sort of semi-AI tools of producing and mastering and getting stuff together, it just seems a lot easier to get where you need to get without really offending anyone. And a lot of records kind of offended people in weird ways because like, well, how the fuck did they get that sound? It's really way out there. Or why is that bass line so out of tune or out of key or out of time even? But yet it works. And people were sampling a lot of breakbeats at those times and doing really strange things with it. Jungle was just starting, drum bass was just starting, and people were learning how to edit. So it was really, everyone was learning how to do something from afresh. And I think that's why the longevity stayed there, because the purity of discovery. Oh, we're stepping into really dangerous territory here. I've gone through phases of my life of being really proud to be a DJ, really quite ashamed to be a DJ, and really proud to be a DJ. I'm sort of at a phase now, I'm almost ashamed to be known as a DJ for what people know it to be. Because like when you've been through phases of like, oh, when are you going to get a proper job? Okay, you can take that. It's like you don't understand. It's at the beginning when people didn't take it seriously and they're sort of putting you down a little bit because they're either concerned or they're just putting you down. And then it's like, oh, you're one of these, are you? And you go, okay, yeah, ha 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 ha. You do scratchy backspin, yeah, ha 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 ha. And then it went through a phase of like being really credible and cool to be a DJ. And now it's deeply embarrassing from what people see to be a DJ. Because there's so much light on stage and they're all dancing, which I've got nothing against people dancing, but it's just like the performance is more important than the music. So we're sort of in a strange era of where there are way too many people that call themselves DJs. And I'm sort of embarrassed to be a DJ. So, but I'll try and step over that for you and head into the technology thing. So what I use is twofold. So when I'm doing radio now, I still use Serato. Serato has this incredible feature called stems, which I then use for when I do my Saga radio show, which is like an alternative radio show. And I can just do live edits and remixes right there and then. It's really good. The only thing where it lets it down a little bit is like Denon. I used to work with Denon and help design their record players and CD players like some time ago. Is that the new version of the Denon CDJ that came out had double layer, so you could actually have 2 decks in one. And what I would like now with stems is that you can have 2 levels in one, so that you can then control it a little bit more with what's going on. But anyway, I digress. So I use CDJ 3000s and the DJM A9, variety of different things like a reloop Serato controller, a DJI S1000 or something like that, and of course the remix as well. I don't think I'm the fairest person to comment if it's got better and worse, because, I mean, as long as I'm not edited out of saying things, I think there's one way to look at this in a really historical way that adds a sort of precedent. So when I was growing up, I sort of came through the Deep Purple, Pink Floyd, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, bring your modular setup and noodle and wank live on stage vibe thing with some amazing musicians, but who got lost in their musicianship, right? And then I grew up with ska, and obviously now I'm over in England. I'm desperate to see This Town and download it onto my iPlayer and bring it back. We had ska, we had punk. Now, the majority of punk people really couldn't play anything. But what happened was it shook the shit out of everything, and it inspired all of us. And so if I go, look at these people, it doesn't really do it the justice of historical looking back. Things are shaking up, and things being shaken up are good. And it changes things. So with punk, it changed so much for me that it made me want to be in music. Because I thought, well, if people can't play their instruments, aka if they can't DJ, then I want to do this. Because I think eventually, in a year, 2, 3, 4 years' time, those people that see these people that obviously cannot DJ, thinking that they can do it, it'll probably step up to another generation of people that are actually going to be fucking great. You know, and with punk, one of my friends calls it chip shop punk, where you go, oh, oi. There was some still good punk groups within that are still actually playing now. And they will always still be around. So some of the new generation that are sort of like changing things, that are good at what they're doing, they'll still be around. But the people that are pretending, you know, dressing up fucking weird and shit and just doing stuff to get attention, but really managing social media well, but not the decks very well, that will probably bring people in and go, well, I can do this, and I can do this in a different way. And I think that will happen. And then you'll end up with what happened after punk, which will be something like new wave, which is more sort of arty and more interesting with more depth. At least that's what I hope. I want to like the track. It's really important for me to like the track. I've done in the past, a long time ago, things that I was okay with. I didn't not like the track, but I was okay with. Maybe 2 or 3 remixes out of all of them, which I was sort of okay with the track. But I need to find something in the track that I like, that really works for me. And as I've got on in my career, that has to be a human element more than anything else, because I honestly don't see the point of me doing any techno remixes, because I don't see what it's bringing to the table. Saying that, sometimes I get some incredible techno remixes that come in, like I just heard a Luke Slater LB Core remix of Dubfire, which just totally tears it apart, and it's brilliant. So, you know, it works in that regard, but I don't feel like I want to be sitting in the studio really doing that. I want to be working with people with voices that sing or, you know, present like guitar, or I just feel like that is where I feel more comfortable at right now. And that change has really been slow, but it also happened during the pandemic, because I just allowed myself to be more back into the music that I was always enjoying outside of club music, and enjoying working with that, with the Saga, but also driving around using it as a backdrop for my photography, listening to music and just being inspired by that, and then working with that. So like the last remix that I did was for Das Special, who was South Coast based, and I worked, and I was, well, I mean, I first heard their music, it was sent to me by a promotion company in Berlin, Tailored, and I loved it, and I played it at this festival in Copenhagen in the Royal Gardens, and I was mixing things like Deep Purple into it and stuff like that. It was like a sort of family festival in the park where you could play alternative music. It was really, and the weather was great, which in Denmark is even more of a miracle than the Netherlands. And I loved what they were doing. And then they sent me this track with this Poppy Mache vocalist. And I was like, whoa, I want to work with this because I'm feeling emotion. It's like when I record music with artists, I only do maybe 2, 3, 4 takes maximum. I don't like comping takes together, because I find that takes it away. If I'm working with a violinist, I want to nail it in 2 or 3 takes, that's it. And I like to really, really be deep into that human element, because now I feel I've finally got the power within my studio to actually do it properly. So that's what I look for in a remix, is like voices, singing, live music as well. I mean, if I look back, it's tricky because I've actually done quite a lot. So I would say, because it's the latest one for me, I would say Das Special came out, what month are we in? It came out at the end of March, beginning of April, I think, 2024. I really enjoyed working with Fontaines DC, that was fun. And then things like Amazing Snakeheads, Place to Bury Strangers, Soft Moon, of course, bless him. Mark Lanigan, working with them, Gazelle Twin, just really interesting artists. Like if you're lucky enough to have them in your studio, or you communicate a lot with them, there's always something to learn, and that's what I enjoy as well. In some ways I work in similar ways. It's really strange with technology, because obviously, you know, if you listen to Juan Atkins records from those days, we're all sitting on our computers, we're doing shit, and of course you trace it back to Kraftwerk, we're talking about computers, John Fox, and it was like this future world on future music, this future world, and then that future world became almost obtainable. Then it became completely obtainable and everyone has it, and now I kind of resent it, because everything is controlled by technology. You know, I was with a friend last night and someone said, oh, find this friend, and then they find them. And that's not what I dreamt of, it's what I worried about. So technology is a bit strange, it's a bit of an anathema now. I don't feel 100% comfortable with it. I see technology almost as our weakness for individuality, whereas before we were striving through it. But I mean, that's the whole moral thing, but going to making music, I still sort of do it in the same way, because I learned from just struggling, working with multi-tracks and things, and the British School of Recording versus the American School of Recording, where Americans always had better equipment, more equipment, so they'd have more tracks, and then they'd give it to the mix engineer to fix it in the mix. And the British School was like, well, we're still on a budget, we can't really afford this, so whilst you might have 24, we're on 8 tracks. So you kind of learnt to be a bit minimalistic on that. And so even though now I have like 60 analog inputs and outputs going consecutively, I still bring it down in the same sort of way, and I make all my decisions as I'm making the music, which is quite natural for a lot of people now, because I feel it makes the flavour of the music when you're going through it, and it teaches you where it needs to go. So I think I'm quite similar in that way, and I actually record onto 2 tracks still, not obviously a reel-to-reel, not a DAT machine or anything like that, but what I do is I actually, as opposed to bounce it within the DAW, I actually ship it out through all my analog pieces of equipment back into the computer using Steinberg Wavelab, so as my DAT recorder or my 2-track, and then that's how I work. So I still work in the same way, but with different tools to bring it together. It just makes sense, but having so many compressors, I generally decide now which compressor is going to have the bass drum, which compressor is going to have this, which compressor is going to have the overheads, which compressor is going to have the bass guitar or the guitar sounds, because I know roughly what sonic signature I'm looking for very, very quickly. And I will use analog compression probably more than 95% of the time, compared to having all the compressors I have on plug-in. I don't really use them because I'm not convinced. Anyone watching here, don't think I'm being snobby, because you'll enjoy using them and you'll get a thing, but if you have the real ones, it just feels different. But when it comes to things like reverb or special effects, then the computer is just fucking outstanding for plugins. There's so many, like Liquid Sonics, for example, like what they can do is so realistic. The Eventide Black Hole is amazing. And Eventide is about the only software compressor I'd use with the Omnipressor. But the computer for those sort of things, the control, and when I say control, I'm not being like all masterful or anything. It's like the amount of artistic variation you can have now with these tools within the box is so much more controllable than what you could have ever dreamt of with MIDI. And of course you can emulate what you do by having auxiliary sends and returns as well, so you can have different channels. But you know, now I've got like a supercomputer and I can literally have 600-700 plugins running consecutively without freezing them. So it's that freedom is amazing. Yeah, there's a few compressors, definitely, like Smart Research C2, SSL G384, which I've just replaced the bulb on because the in thing went. It's so cute. You have to get like a little pinch pliers to pull out the bulb, and you push it back in and it works. Like old school, no firmware updates. It's just like the bulb's gone, I have to get a new bulb and put it in. What else? I think I've still got my original distressors from like 1999 or 2000 as well. Well, I don't know about new right now, because everything is just like a sort of an incrementation of previous stuff, so it's more powerful, it's better. I think the last thing that really blew my socks off, because I was a tannoy person through and through because of my father, who was into tannoys. The last thing that totally blew my socks off was probably ATC. When I put ATC monitors in my studio, all of a sudden I could hear the absolute complex reverb tails in a really complicated mix and really understand what was going on. So the ATCs really blew my socks off. And then the last sort of functional, non-sexy but very sexy would be a piece of equipment would be the Crane Song, anything from Crane Song, who's, you know, Dave Hill sadly passed away last year. And actually I got an email from him like about 6 weeks before he passed away, because I have the Avocet. That Avocet is just fucking amazing. Like, it does what it's supposed to do. And when you're in a studio, you want things that do what they're supposed to do, not have to wade through like complicated stuff. It just does what it is supposed to do. And the other thing that blew me away also was the head, the harmonic distortion device. I had an original one from 1999, and then I got the upgraded version of that, which I had to wait 4 years for. I sort of joked because I said it takes so long because Dave Hill has to grow the crystals for it to actually work properly. But I got that, and that is an amazing piece of kit as well. Other piece of the kit is more sort of ergonomic. So, you know, like lights in the studio. Actually, the last piece of equipment that really blew my head off was a Josephson mic. I've never heard a microphone like this. Never heard. I can't remember the model name, but I've never heard a microphone like this. It just does everything with ease, and it's transparent or as dirty as you want it to be. And I actually have that on its own going through the old head from Crane Song. Okay, so I teach at Harlem Conservatorium music production and politics at the same time. And what I teach kids there, and I can say kids now because I'm over 50 and they're younger than 25, so it's not derogatory at all. What I teach the kids is that the environment that you work in is also very, very important. You can concentrate on this amazing plugin that's going to answer all your questions and prayers and everything, but it doesn't. You can think about this or that piece of equipment, but actually, when you get to a certain level, and most people are at a certain level just with a computer anyway, your environment that you work in. So have some plants, have some natural light if possible, have a radio on in the kitchen so that you could just go off to the kitchen and you hear something that you haven't chosen, that takes your mind somewhere completely different and refreshes you in such a way. Those sort of things are really, really important to be creative, I think. Being ergonomically in a good position. So if you're working in a studio, make sure that the seat is really, really comfortable. Stupid things like this, right? Make sure that the table is the right height, that you have a light behind the computer screen so you don't get knackered with your eyes. Don't force yourself to constantly listen to the music all the time. I call it Guantanamo Baying yourself, where you're constantly playing the same music 24 hours and then you have no choice but to like it, and then you dream of it. It's like if you remember playing Command & Conquer or SimCity for 8 or 9 hours, then you go to bed and you're still seeing everyone in your eyes on the screen in front of you. You don't want to do that. You want to tune out. So sometimes switch it off, listen to radio, watch a studio podcast about something because it makes you think in a different way. And then just apply those things and then see what happens. So I don't really have like any magic tips. It's just really, it's more spiritual and more ergonomic and just about respecting your own body in that environment. Christ, did I just turn into a hippie? Probably did. Not good.